I have the final composition up in front of me here, and this is exactly how it looked when I finished it. You can see there's 19 layers in here, not too many layers, and there's no pre-comps either. I haven't actually used any pre-comps in this, which was refreshing. Didn't need to. So what I've done is I've pre-rendered this out with a proxy, just so that when I drag my time indicator, it just plays back a little bit better for me. You'll just see it kind of jumping through the frames. You won't see it play back in real time. But hopefully you've all seen the final animation, and you know what it looks like, and you're curious to find out how it was built. So let's just jump straight in. Okay, so the first thing I put into this project was the lens flare. Now the lens flare sits right at the back of everything, so it's at the very bottom of the layer stack. And this is one of the lens flare 3D lens flares from Boris Continuum Complete 8. Let's get my effect controls panel up here. For this lens flare, I chose a preset. This is Green Starburst Chroma Fan, and if I click on the presets and just hold that there, that'll pop up for you in a moment. You can see there's a long list of presets, so there's lots of variety to choose from. I just chose this one because it said green, and I knew I wanted to do something green. And I literally didn't have to do anything else to this flare. It was exactly how I wanted it. You can see it's got this beautiful green burst, and it's got this lovely chroma fan. But I did keyframe a couple of things. You might notice that the chroma fan is actually getting larger. So it starts off smaller, closer to the center of the flare, and then it shoots out. And then it rotates. I just felt that it could be really nice for this animation if at the very beginning that particular graphic element just wasn't very obvious, but then sort of shot out from the middle. Just makes it a little bit more dramatic, adds a bit more interest. And notice how the chroma flare is also, the chroma fan, sorry, is also rotating. Let's just take a look at the keyframes and you can see what I did. So here for the movement of the chroma fan from the center, I use radial offset. If I just drag that value backwards and forwards, you should see the chroma moving in and out, which is really nice. And for the angle, I've used a simple expression. I've used the time expression. And the angle is what is rotating the chroma fan around the center of the body of the flare. And the time expression basically is just giving me a value based on the current time. So as the current time indicator moves, I get a value, and that makes the angle rotate. And I've also multiplied that by 20, so it actually makes it rotate a little bit faster than the current time, 20 times the current time. Time expressions are really good for creating auto animation of layers. Now, most importantly with this, and this is something I added right at the very end when I was building this animation, you can see how the flare is pulsing. The intensity of the flare is pulsing in and out. And to do that, I've used the built-in Beat Reactor. And the Beat Reactor is right at the bottom here in the effect panel. Beat Reactor is actually a standalone effect in Boris Continuum Complete 8 family, and it enables you to control the attributes of layers using audio, which is fantastic. It's extremely useful for quickly creating animation that's synced to audio. What's great about Boris Continuum Complete, because there are other effects that do this, but one of the things that's great about Boris Continuum Complete is that this is actually built into a number of the effects that are part of the set. So you can see there's Beat Reactor down here, and the difference here is the fact that it's built in, which makes it much more accessible, but it also gives me specific parameters. You can see down here where it says apply parameter A. These are the parameters that it allows me to link to the audio, and these are the parameters that are part of this effect. I've chosen global intensity. What I'm also going to do is just turn on the graph so you can see. Let's just find the graph setting. Show graph, yes. I think I've just got the opacity of the graph down to 0. I'm just going to increase the opacity of the graph. And there you can see the graph at the bottom of the composition. So what's happening is the Beat Reactor is sampling a piece of music that I've put into the composition, and this is the audio spectrum from that piece of music. And the piece of music is this drums file here. I've actually imported 3 different pieces of music three different components from the same piece of music, and this is part of the Music Box 1 collection from Digital Juice. And I've imported it as the drum pass, the synth pass, and the brass pass. And I've used the drum pass individually to control the intensity of the flare. When you take a look at the render that I did, the breakdown, you can see I've actually rendered it out with just the drums, so you can see how the drums are controlling the intensity of the flare. And you can see here as I drag through how when the part of the spectrum hits the little box here on the left, this sample box, this graph on the end on the right hand side goes up and down. And you can see when the graph on the right is at its peak, that's when the intensity is highest. So what does it all mean? What it means is I'm controlling a parameter from the flare using the music. And what does that mean as from a design perspective? What it's doing is it's really adding impact to the spot. Because anytime you can link or sync the graphic elements up to your audio, it instantly adds drama and impact to your spots. And what's great is that Boris Continuum Complete 8 has this as part of many of the effects, so you don't have to go in and choose it as a separate effect, put it on a solid, do all of that. You've got it as part of the effect, so I can grab it and use it right there as part of the effect. So that's it. That's the lens flare. Let's move on to the next composition. Obviously, if you have any questions about any of these things I'm talking about, we can discuss them at the end of the presentation. Next is organic strands. Now, I was actually asked to demo 5 effects when I created this look, and I haven't had a lot of experience with Boris Continuum Complete, and I kept finding effects that I thought were going to be useful for this look, and I ended up using 11 effects in this look. There's 11 Boris Continuum Complete effects, and I think personally that nothing looks out of place. I haven't tried to force effects into this look. I just looked through the menus and I go, oh, what's that? What's that? And I kept finding things that I thought were going to be useful for this look. So 11 different effects. Next one is organic strands. And what you can see in front of you is just the default setting for organic strands. And it's pretty much, it looks pretty much what it says. Organic strands is basically a particle-based 3D strand generator. And that's the basic look. I thought that looked pretty interesting. Let me just select the layer that I created. Now, as with all of the Boris Continuum Complete 8 effects, you have a lot of presets to choose from. In this case, I didn't choose a preset. I ended up just starting from the original and just modifying that to what I needed. And once again, keep in mind that I had never used this effect before. This is the first time I've used this effect. And I really did find it easy to go through and just drag values around and experiment. It was very responsive and it allowed me to come up with the look that I wanted very, very quickly. Let's turn off the original and I'll turn on the one that I created. A little bit dark, so I'm just going to turn on the transparency grid. So that is my modified strands, and you can see that they're kind of a dark green color, and they also have this little sphere. So what did I create? Let's have a look. Well, the look I was going for with this was, because this is the Hulk, I really wanted to give it a kind of a mutated DNA strand kind of feel, and I think that's been pretty effective with this. For the color, I chose to use the Multicolored Gradient, and I have a gradient that goes from a dark green through to a bright green through to a dirty yellow color, and that's what's giving me the color of the strands. You can see the black is at the very back of the composition in the distance, and the yellow is in the foreground. What's really good about this particular gradient is I have this squeeze value here, this squeeze parameter, and if I drag that, it basically slides the colors. So I can set my colors up, and then I can sort of shift them along the strands by dragging the squeeze parameter, which is really valuable. I like to be able to set things up and not have to go back and change them to see how they look, but to have something where I can just offset the colors just makes it much faster for me. Experimentation is the key. Anything that makes it easier for me to experiment, in the end allows me to come up with a much greater look, a much better look, because I can spend more time on the design and less time, punching in numbers. Okay, so that's the color. For the particle, I actually chose the image collection, and from the image collection I chose the gray sphere. And there is a lot of particles here. You can see as I'm dragging down up your screen, that list is just huge. I ended up going for something pretty simple. I probably could have chosen a number of different particles, but the gray sphere seemed to do the job. And there are no keyframes applied to this effect. What's actually controlling all the movement is the organic noise settings. I love that word organic. I always try to make my animations look more and more organic. And I think that's probably one of the things that actually drew me to this effect, because it actually is called organic strands. But you can see here there's a range of different organic noise settings. And down here we have auto evolve speed. So it actually is evolving automatically. Anytime I don't have to set keyframes to make something move, once again saves me time. Now, lastly, for the organic strands, notice down the bottom here, it has a beat reactor. So this has a beat reactor built in all for itself. Just going to enable that for a moment. And you can see here under apply parameter A, it's unused at the moment. But these are the parameters, the available parameters for organic strands that I could control using the beat reactor. And I could have gone in and I could have spent weeks on this animation. Of course, I could have done any number of different things. I could have animated these strands to the beat. Really, it could have been endless. In this case, I didn't use the beat reactor, but it's nice to know that it's there. Okay, so organic strands, a terrific creative option as part of the set of Boris Continuum Complete 8. Let's move on to the next composition. Hopefully you guys are keeping up, and it's pretty straightforward. Next, I added some particles using the Particle Emitter 3D plugin. And what I've done for each of these compositions is I've pre-rendered the previous composition so that you can see down here I actually have the flare rendered with the organic strands. And that's what you'll see when you watch that QuickTime movie of the breakdown. It's nice to see, it's amazing to see actually how all I've used is one flare and the organic strands, and already this looks like a really detailed and complex animation. You can see I've also set the organic strands just to fade off slightly towards the back in the center of the flare, because you really want to give these animations a sense of depth, and by fading them out or even blurring them out towards the center helps them with the illusion of depth. Okay, so Particle Emitter 3D. Now I used Particle Emitter 3D to create, well, not to create the blood platelets, but to add the blood platelets that shoot out from the center of the animation. And to create the blood cell, I'm just going to turn it on here, I actually use Cinema 4D. It's a very simple case of creating a sphere and just making that sphere editable and squashing that sphere, and then just applying a displacement channel to it. And it gives me that kind of, mutated organic look that sort of signifies that, Bruce Banner's blood is changing. So that's the particle I used, and it actually rotates twice, and it's a seamless loop. Let's take a look at the Particle Emitter 3D settings. Now for particle shape, by the way, actually, before I go into particle shape, just keep in mind that for both the flare and for organic strands, I've chosen Use Comp Camera, as I have for Particle Emitter 3D, and for many of the effects in this composition. Many of the 3D effects in, all of the 3D effects in Boris Continuum Complete 8 can use the composition camera. And there actually is a camera in this scene, I've just made it shy. If I just unshy that, you can see camera 1. So it's great to be able to apply multiple layers to the project and be able to have them all respond to the same camera. Now for the particle shape, I've chosen host image layers. You can choose any different number of particle shapes, but I chose host image layers, and I chose as my particle shape as my image layer, the blood cell 01.movie. And I also chose for the sample mode layer evolve, and that enables the particle to seamlessly loop and continuously play back looping as it's shooting out from the center of the animation. Let's just turn that layer on. So there's my particles, and I haven't done anything too crazy with the settings for this. I've just used a point emitter that shoots the particles out from the center of the composition. I think what really helps this is the fact that I've used a 3D particle. And also notice how the particles are starting red and they're transforming to green, of course, because Bruce Banner's turning into the Hulk, right? So his blood's turning green. If I could have, I would have set it up so the actual blood cells themselves could transform from being perfectly flat cells to mutated cells, but I didn't have that ability. But I think this sells it anyway. Now for colors, once again I've chosen the gradient, and you might notice here that this gradient setting is the same as organic strands. Here I've chosen to colorize from red to green. And take a look at this. I told you about squeeze. This is another good reason, another good time to use squeeze. I set the red blood cells in the distance and the green blood cells in the foreground, and I wasn't sure how many red blood cells I wanted. So I just dragged the squeeze value, and I was able to slide that gradient and decide, well, how many blood cells are red and how many are green. And that was really a design decision based on how it looked sitting on the background. In the end, I chose to have it around -46 because I wanted to have some of the cells red, but I didn't want to have too many red, because from a design sense, having too many red blood cells actually didn't look as good as having this whole outer area green. So I wanted to have the sort of transformation in there, but I didn't want to have too many red blood cells. Nice to know that I can have the cells transform over time like that. Now, to give the blood cells a little more organic movement, I've used the circular movement setting, and let me just select this layer. I'm going to press U twice on the keyboard just to show the parameters. And you can see here under external forces, I've chosen the circular movement setting, and I really like this. This makes the particles move in a circular way. And the idea behind this was that it makes them, gives them a little more natural movement, as if they're moving in liquid, because I really wanted this whole look to feel as if it was moving in liquid. Because remember, this is the blood. This is inside his body. I'm going to show him how many people have flares inside their body, but hey, it's the Hulk. And last of all, for this, it's very subtle, but what I did was I just adjusted the opacity boost of the flare, and I've dropped that to -5, and it just gives a very slight transparency, so we can see the other flares beneath the ones in front of them, and we can also see some of the light coming through the flares from the background. So just adjust that opacity very slightly. A little is often a lot in this case. It's very subtle. You can just see the outline of that flare, of that platelet behind the one in the foreground, but it just helps. These little things all add detail, and as you layer them one upon another, become very effective in the final look. Okay, so that's Particle Emitter 3D. And when I'd done that particle layer, I thought it needs a little bit more. It needs more particles. So I actually created a second particle layer. Let's take a look at that. This is almost the exact same settings as the platelets. I basically duplicated the effect. And for this one, it's a bit hard to see. I'm just going to duplicate it so you can see them a little easier. For this one, I just increased the amount of particles, and I didn't use the platelet. I actually used a round blur. Let me just select them and go to the effect controls. Now the birth color is just green. I didn't want these to change from red to green. I probably could have, but in this case it didn't really matter. And for the particle, I've chosen the round blur. Let me just find that so I can show you where that is. This is a massive effect. There's so many different settings in here. It's mind-boggling. Round blurs, there we go, particle shape. Once again, you've got a number of different shapes you can choose. Remember, for the platelets, I chose host image layers. Now, the only other difference with this one compared to the platelets is that I actually added more circular movement to this, and you'll see that in the render when you take a look. There's more circular movement, and there's even some movement noise. And I like to have those settings in this effect because it gives me the opportunity to make these particles move more randomly. Let me just find it here. You can see under fractal field, I've increased the amount of movement noise to 10. And the idea here is that these are smaller, lighter particles, and they're more likely to be pushed around by the current than the platelets. So you've got the platelets moving a little bit more slowly. They're moving in the same direction, of course, but these ones are just moving around a little bit faster, adding a little bit more detail, making the whole thing look a little bit more frenetic. And this extra detail can really help sell the look. Lastly, placing them behind the platelets was important, because if I'd placed them in front of the platelets, I would have lost a lot of depth. These are smaller, and obviously they're coming from the distance, and there really is no starting point for this animation. It's really coming from somewhere in the distance. You don't know how far, you don't know where, and these look a lot better sitting behind the platelets. Just helps sell the shot. So if you're creating multiple layers like this with multiple particles, definitely try changing the different stacking order to see how it looks and how it works. Okay, so that's Particle Emitter 3D, just adding with the round blurs, adding a little bit more detail. Okay, let's move on. Next is Stage Light. Stage Light is a really useful effect. Now this is the composition before Stage Light. You can see I've got the flare, the organic strands, the Particle Emitter 3D for the platelets, and I've got the particles for the round blur. The detail is really increasing now. You see it's quite dark. I've actually added two lights to the scene. If I select them, let's just zoom out here. You can see there's one light at the top of the comp, just out of the frame. And there's also one light at the bottom of the composition, just out of the frame. If I double click light 1, this is just a sort of a yellowy green or a greeny yellow color. And light 2 is more of a cyan. And I've added the stage light effect. Now what happens is Stage Light actually adds volumetric light to After Effects' regular lights. And I'm going to just solo that just so you can see what I'm talking about. You can just notice it a little bit at the top here and a little bit at the bottom. It's just dropping some volumetric light in the top and the bottom. Let me just increase the intensity, the master intensity. Actually, this effect has a master intensity, but it also can use the intensity of the After Effects lights. So you can use both. So you could set the intensity with the After Effects light and then use the master intensity just to adjust that for all of the light's intensities as one. See, as I increase that, you can see the intensity increasing. And notice, you might just notice that there actually is a kind of smoky environment with this as well. And this is one of the fantastic features about this effect. It has built-in smoke. Let me just bring the smoke setting up so you can see that. Smoke is set to on and density is 17. I didn't need it to be too dense. Let me just crank up that density. Look at that. It actually has the volumetric light revealing the smoke, and this goes a long way to adding depth to the look. Really, really useful to be able to add a little bit of noise to lights. And you could do something like this using maybe a fractal effect and using the light as a matte to reveal the fractal, but that all takes time. It's lovely to be able to have the smoke included in the effect. Really nice, and it moves in a really natural way as well. It swirls, it evolves. It's very, very good. Let me just knock that back. Now, if I turn that layer on with my background layer, it's not doing a whole hell of a lot to this. You can see it's actually adding a bit of light to the bottom, a bit of light to the top. It is adding to the overall color of it. I like that it's adding some variation to the color. Generally, the whole thing is quite green, but this light at the top adds a little bit of blue. The light at the bottom adds a little bit of yellow. And this color variation really goes a long way when finishing a shot. And also make it look more realistic, because obviously light is generally yellow or blue. So that's the stage light. Let's just move on to the next composition. Next is the text. We're over halfway now. Okay, extruded text. Obviously this is the key to this animation. I kept thinking about different things that I could write for this. It was I started off with the word Hulk, and I was thinking, what words could I use before Hulk? And I was I probably was thinking whether I could use some bad language. He's big, he's pissed, something like that. But I wasn't sure whether I'd get away with that. So I just said big, green, and angry. Which describes the Hulk very, very, very succinctly, I think. And I've used the 3D extruded text for this. Let's take a look. I'm going to select the Hulk layer, and very, very easy text to use. For this, I could have chosen any number of different extrusion styles. There's lots of different extrusions. You can see how many there are. I'm just dragging up and down here. Obviously, one of the benefits of the Boris Continuum Complete 3D text over the built-in After Effects CS6 text is that After Effects only has 3 different bevels. Really nice to have all these different kinds of bevels. Definitely use this as a starting point. I've actually chosen something quite simple. I ended up using just a convex bevel, a very slight convex bevel, because I knew I wanted to deform this. And anytime you add too much detail into a bevel, into the object, and you start deforming it, then you can get some polygons doing some crazy things. And I wanted this to really sort of expand and look kind of like muscles, and I didn't want it to sort of rip apart. You do have some settings in the render section here where you can increase the polygon count. But I haven't got a huge setting for polygon count, and I don't even have the best setting, and it actually is quite a fast render. So I kept it fairly simple. What I did do for this was, for the front texture file, I chose metallic coated metal. There's a whole heap of different textures. I mean, this is the longest list in the whole set of plugins, I think. It just keeps going and going. There's so much here to choose from. I chose the metallic coated metal, and I chose that to be the material on all sides. You can see I could have different materials on the front, side, bevel, and back, which is very good creatively. But for this one, I didn't need that, so I chose to have the same material on all the sides. And you'll see in a minute when I turn the lights on, how that changes the color of the text on the top and the bottom and the sides. So that gives me a little bit of variation using the lights. So I've used that texture file on the front, and that just adds a little bit of interest and detail to the front and the rest of the model. But what I did was I chose a different bump file for the bump map. I could have chosen exactly the same one because it's the same list. But what I like to do often when I'm using a bump map is I like to use a different kind of bump, and it really adds some nice variation. Let me just increase the bump strength. You can see there's the bump there. And the actual metallic texture that I use to wrap around the object is more of a straight line, more vertical. And this is more of a horizontal texture. Just goes and adds a little bit more interest, a little bit more detail. Obviously I didn't want that much bump. I wanted it very subtle. So that's the textures. Now you might notice here for the color it says diffuse and it's gray, but this object's green. That's because I actually colorized this using the built-in lights. And this is also one of the terrific features of Boris Continuum Complete 8, and this is definitely opposed to some of the other 3D plugins that are available as well. In Boris Continuum Complete 8 you can actually use the built-in light, but you can also use the After Effects lights. And yes, you can use that, you can do that in other plugins, but here you can use them both together. And I'm unaware of other plugins that allow you to use them both together. I'm pretty sure Element 3D does that, but here I find that very, very useful. What I've done is I've used a built-in light, and that's given me the color of the object. Let me just change that from green, change that to, let's say, red. So you can see how that colorizes the text. So you can use the light to colorize the text. But as I mentioned, what I've also done is I've used the comp lights as well. Now these comp lights are turned off, and notice that these are actually the same lights that I used for the stage light. Take a look at what happens to the text when I turn these lights on. Remember, I used a cyan light at the top and I use a yellow-green light at the bottom. You can see at the moment the text looks a bit flat. Okay? When I turn the lights on, there's the top one, you'll see this beautiful blue at the top of the text. I'm going to turn it off again and on again. Look at that. Really lovely. It's being picked up in those bumps. It's being picked up at the top of the text. The bottom light was yellow-green, and that's really, really good one, that one. It really helps that text pop out. Together, they look amazing. Really works well with that text. And it's also being picked up really nicely in the bump and the lumpiness. And we'll talk about the lumpiness in a moment, the deformation. I want to talk to you about one other small thing before I move on to that, and that's the environment. I've actually chosen a different setting for the reflection. Not a different setting, sorry. I've chosen a reflection, and this is the blurred low sat dark reflection. So you can choose different, these are reflection maps, and this is what the text will reflect. If I chose horizon blue, you can see that actually changes the text slightly, gives it a slightly blue shade. If I increase the reflectivity to 100, you can see now I have quite blue text, and that's 100% reflecting the horizon blue. But what I ended up doing was using just a low setting with blur low sat dark, and this just gave me a little bit of reflection, which is really nice. It just adds, you can see as I drag the intensity up and down, it just adds that extra bit of detail as if there's something in the environment that the text is reflecting as it's moving through. So you can see how with these settings I can put different materials on, I can put different bumps on, I can use different environments. All of these things help sell the finished look of the text. But lastly for this, before I move on, I want to show you the deformers. The Extruded Text has built-in deformers. It has a jitter setting, a bend, taper, twist deformer, a curl deformer, shatter, ripple, but I use pulse. And the pulse setting is basically designed to give the text a lumpy appearance, and it's auto-animating the pulse. So what you would do is you would choose the effect type. I chose lumpy, but you can use bold, deform, twist, and the pulse type is what gives it its pulse. You can see you have breathing, which is more of a sort of the deformations increasing and decreasing as if the object is breathing. You can have them move quite erratically. You can see jerky. There's different creative options in here. What I wanted was to have full control, and I didn't know what to do, but beautifully I found in pulse type paused. I knew exactly what that meant. I was able to create the lumpiness by increasing the amplitude, so I could animate the amplitude from 0 to the value that I wanted and not have the effect pulse in and out. So I got full control. So I could use any of these settings in the effect type and control them by setting them to pause and adjusting the amplitude. And that's what allows me to give the text that lumpiness just when I wanted to have it and just the amount that I want to give it. Really nice. And look at that. You can see how when the text is up close, how that light at the top is being picked up in the sides there, and same at the bottom. And a very slight bevel just so that picks up the light and helps this pop out. Really, really nice. Okay, so that's 3D text. Let's move on to the next one, because this next one's very important. This is how I composited the 3D text into the background. So we'd done the background. I'd use lens flare 3D, organic strands, 2 sets of particles, stage light, then I created the text, and then I needed to have the text feel like it was part of that environment. And there's a nice range of effects in Boris Continuum Complete 8 that I can use to ensure that this text really is part of the environment. It really sells the shot. I knew what I wanted to do, so I looked through the effects, and I was lucky enough to find what I needed to sell this. So let me just solo my effects. So there's my extruded text. And you can see at the moment it looks okay, but it doesn't really fit in this background. It needs some work. So the first thing I did to this was I applied Boris Continuum Complete 8's Film Glow. Film Glow is terrific. It gives a really nice filmic glow. It's particularly useful on footage, but it's also obviously useful on these graphic elements as well. I'm just turning this on and off. You can see how it's just adding a nice soft glow over the text, and it's also giving the text just this slightly light green hue, almost lemony hue. The color I've used for this is a really, really fluorescent yellow, but I've used quite a low intensity. If I crank that up, you can see it just makes the text, whoa, it just glows like nobody's business. But I just wanted this subtle, because in a moment I'm going to show you how I use the same effect on the background. And I've used a different color, so I was able to keep them isolated. On the text I wanted this yellow. So that's very subtle. Next I use the Bcc 8 levels and gamma, and this is pretty much like After Effects standard levels effect. Just able to increase the contrast because the film glow just dropped the contrast a little bit. So I just increased the contrast. Let me just turn that on. I'll just toggle that on and off. Just a little bit of contrast. Next was a very important effect, light wrap, BCC light wrap. And what a light wrap effect does is it wraps the color values of and the lightness values of pixels from the background around the foreground object to which the light wrap effect is applied. Take a look at this. You can see at the top of the text there's actually quite a dark halo. It wasn't as bad as that when I had the other effects turned off. Still wasn't great, but the film glow and the levels and gamma have actually created quite a dark halo, which has actually made it even less integrated with the background. But what light wrap can do is it can sample the pixels from a control layer and wrap those around the foreground layer. Now I've actually had to use a pre-render for this, so what I ended up doing was I pre-rendered the background. And this is the layer that I'm using for the light wrap. So as the background changes, the light wrap will also change. Let me just turn that back on. And I'm just going to zoom in. You can see that black halo. I'm going to turn the light wrap effect on. Look at the difference. A huge amount of difference. That really goes to a long way to selling this shot. So it's taken colors from the background layer and wrapped them around the foreground layer. That's locking in the foreground layer with the background layer, making them appear as one. Very, very easy to use light wrap. Doesn't have a lot of settings. I just chose as the background, the light wrap .mov, and just played around with the softness and the width and the lightness. And also played with the apply mode. You've got different modes you can use. I wanted something bright, so I used add. Let me just turn that off again. It always blows me away. I just have to keep turning it on and off. Such an important effect, light wrap. And I'd done that and I thought, yeah, it's looking terrific. So, maybe I'll leave it like that. But of course, I was exploring the effects and I found this other one here, Bcc Rgb Edges. Let me just turn this on. And this just adds even more glow, but it's a different kind of glow. It adds glow to the edges of the object. And you can control where the glow is by adjusting the light direction. At the moment it's at plus 45 degrees, but if I just rotate that, I can actually have the light hitting the object from different angles. And I just thought it needed a little bit more glow, make it look a little more sort of superhero-like. And I used a little bit of RGB edges. So just another creative option as part of Boris Continuum Complete 8 set. All right, let's move on. We've only got two more now. We're almost finished. These are really the finishing effects. I could have left it like that, and I think many people would have left it like that. But I ended up adding a couple more things. There's my background rendered once again. And I'll turn on my Hulk layer. Next, I added some adjustment layers. And these adjustment layers, if you'll notice, are actually below the Hulk, below the text. Because I didn't want to affect the text. I'd already done everything I wanted to do to the text individually. And I wanted to affect the background individually. So I've used film glow once again on an adjustment layer. And you can see it's quite subtle. I'm going to toggle that on and off. It just adds a nice glow to the background and also gives it some depth. It almost acts like a kind of a fog. So a subtle film glow. And also RGB edges. Let me just turn that on. This really hits it with a glow, but it's a different kind of glow. As you saw before, you can actually control where the glow is by adjusting the angle. And you can see here how it kind of gives this really interesting glow where it's kind of offset on the side of objects. I just really like that look. I thought that looked so cool. It just gave it a really interesting look. And there was no other reason to apply that other than just because I thought it looked really good. Just gave it a little more interest, made it look a little more ethereal, or just give it a little more. But not too much more. Didn't want to overdo it. So two adjustment layers, film glow and RGB edges. And last but not least, this is the very last thing I applied to this, was Scanline. I'm a sucker for Scanline. I love that kind of TV video screen look. But there's a really important reason why I did this. You can see the difference that makes. If I turn it off, that's what we had in the previous composition. This is all looking fine, but it actually works really well sometimes when you're doing these kind of composites where you want to make text look as if it, is in part of a background. If at the very end you use some adjustment layers where you combine all of the layers together. And these can be things like Scanline, it can be noise, it could be grain, it could even be a color grade. But something on top just to help all of the elements feel unified, all as one. And I thought Scanline was good as I was playing around because it did a couple of things. One, it unifies everything. So everything has a scan line over it, so it feels like one finished spot. But also the scan lines give it a kind of, I guess, a kind of sci-fi feel, which I thought was quite interesting as well. And notice also that it actually has darkened everything. So it actually increased the contrast just quite nicely. Just gave it a bit of finishing contrast. If I hadn't done that, I might have used some curves or Boris levels gamma. But I thought the scan line just gave it a really nice finish. And I've used a slightly lower opacity at 80%, and I've used the soft light blend mode. Definitely always playing with blend modes when I use adjustment layers, just coming in here, trying different blend modes, testing them out. There's a lot of experimentation in motion graphics, and I do a lot of these kind of things, for in the job that I do, doing promos for movies, and always experimenting with different kinds of things to come up with the final look that I want. And I love that Boris Continuum Complete 8 has such a huge range of creative effects. I mean, there's so many effects in this series, but I was able to use 11 different ones, and I probably could have used others, but I think these 11 came together really beautifully to give me a really finished, cohesive piece. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to just show you one more thing, and that is my good friend Eran Stern has just released some templates for Boris Continuum Complete. I'm just going to quickly bring that up on the screen. Eran's a very, very experienced After Effects user, and he's just released a whole bunch of different broadcast graphics templates. And these are specifically for After Effects users who use Boris Continuum Complete. And you can use these as they are or use them as a starting point. Eran has included a number of different tutorials to allow you to modify these and to make them your own. And hopefully you'll take some of the things that you learned from me about why you would do things and taking things to the next level, and use this as a starting point and then make them your own as well.